Okay, gang, so today we're going to be changing things up and now looking at equations where we have variables on both sides of the equation. So no longer will the bulk of the equation just be on one side. We will have lots of things on opposite sides that we need to consider in order to simplify the equation. So let's take a look at the procedure here. We're first going to use inverse or opposite operations to combine like terms on opposite sides of the equal sign. So whenever you cross that equal sign, you need to do the opposite. All right. So if you have positive 5x on one side and you want to bring it to the other side, you have to subtract it. If you have negative 2/3 x on one side and you want to bring it to the other side, you would have to add it. Then we're going to use inverse operations once again to isolate the variable. That means get x by itself. You want to get rid of the coefficient. So if it's 3x, you're going to divide both sides by 3. If it's 5/2 x, you're going to multiply both sides by 2/5. And last, you're going to check your solution if time is allowed. Okay, so if you have enough time, go ahead and mentally check that answer. Make sure you've got it correct, or use your calculator to quickly check the answer. All right, so let's take a look at this first problem. 6 1/4x minus 28 is equal to 2.75x. So usually we don't have an x on both sides of the equal sign, and today we do. So instead of adding 28 to both sides, I need to do something to get the 6 1/4 and 2 3/4 together. Now, since here's my equal sign, think of it as a balance. This side has two terms, this side only has one. It makes sense to bring one of the terms from the left-hand side over to the right-hand side. So in order to do that, since the right-hand side has an x, I have to bring the term with an x from the left over to that side. All right, so that 6 1/4 right now is positive. The opposite of a positive is a negative. We're not referring to this sign. We're thinking about, well, this is positive 6 1/4. So we're going to subtract 6 1/4 from both sides. Which gives me negative 28. Make sure you're bringing down that minus sign. That's a common mistake. Don't let that be what makes you get the wrong answer. And then I'm going to reverse this, but keep the negative. So 6 1/4 minus 2 3/4. 5 minus 5 is 0. Borrow from the 6. 12 minus 7 is 5. Bring down the decimal. 5 minus 2 is 3. So this is 350x. Divide by 350x, or negative 350x rather, not x, just 350, cancels, and divide by negative 350 here. Well, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so we don't have to worry about the negative anymore. Now use some number sense. 350, or $3.50, is half of 7. 7 goes into 28 4 times. Therefore, 350 is going to go into 28 8 times. So x equals 8. Done. Okay, so now we can try number 2. If you had a calculator, you could very quickly plug in that 8 and make sure both sides are equivalent to each other. Let's see the next problem. All right, so I believe I'm skipping number 2. I am. I'm going to do number 3 with you, now looking at some fractions. You'll come back to number 2 later. So for number 3, we have fractions. Remember, when we're dealing with fractions and we're adding or subtracting, we need common denominators in order to do that. So again, we're trying to balance this equation. I have two terms on this side, one term on this side. The one term on the right side has an x. Therefore, I have to bring the term with the x on the left side over to it. So 1/3 is positive right now. The opposite of a positive is a negative. So we're going to subtract it, minus 1/3 x. Now, I'm bringing over 1/3 x, but I have 5/6. So it makes sense to convert that 1/3 to a congruent equation out of 6. All right, so 1/3 is equivalent to 2/6. So I'm going to subtract 2/6 instead of 1/3. Now I bring down the positive 5, or just 5, equals 5/6 minus 2/6 is 3/6 x. So now I have 5 equals 3/6, which is 1/2 of x. Opposite of 1/2 would be to multiply by the reciprocal, which is just 2. Therefore, x equals 10. And then we have the correct answer, x equals 10. So we could check it. It would be a little bit tricky mentally, but if we have 1/3 of 10 plus 5 equals 5/6 of 10. That would be 10/3 plus 5 equals 56ths. Okay, so 10/3 plus 5, I could think of it as 10/3 plus 15/3, which is 25/3. And half of 50 is 25. Half of 6 is 3. So both sides are equivalent to 25/3. Looks like it wouldn't work out. But if you actually do the math, keep it as an improper fraction, you see that it is correct. Now, again, when it comes time to the regions, they don't really ever ask you to check it. But if time is allowed, if you have the time, you might as well use it to make sure that you're doing it correctly. All right, let's see where we go next. Skipping number 4, let's jump to number 5. So now here we have two terms on each side, all right? So I like to always start by putting the x parts together, or the coefficients of the x's together. Now, because I can, I usually try to avoid having a negative. So if I have 9x and 11x, it would be easier to subtract 9x from both sides so I don't get a negative. So I'm going to start by balancing by minus or subtracting 9x from both sides. The 9x cancels out. Remember to bring down the negative. So negative 2 equals 11 minus 9, which is 2x plus 5. Subtract 5. Negative 7 equals 2x. Divide by 2. And x equals negative 3.5. Done. Again, you could plug that back in if time is allowed to make sure that you got it correct. All right, let's go to the next problem. Skipping 6, let's look at 7. Again, I'm doing the odds with you. You're going to do the evens on your own. So now I've got variables on both sides again with some more fractions. I've got 3/4 x and negative 1/8 x. I want to put those together first. Since one is negative, I want to add that to the opposite side to balance and avoid having more negatives. So I'm going to add 1/8 x to both sides. Now, 3/4, if I'm thinking in eighths, is 6/8. So 6 plus 1 is going to be 7/8 x plus 16 equals 2. Subtract 16 from both sides. 7/8 x equals negative 14. Then the opposite of a fraction would be its reciprocal. So that's 8/7. So x equals negative 14 divided by 7 is negative 2 times 8 is negative 16. Final answer. All right. One more odd with you, I believe, before you're trying some on your own. Let's take a look at number 9. So here again, looks like we've got a little bit more added in because now we have the distributive property on top of having terms on both sides. So let's get rid of the parentheses before we do anything else by distributing that 1/2. So we have a half of 6 is 3x, and a half of negative 18 is negative 9, equals 5x plus 21. Now again, I want to get my coefficients of x together on both sides. I want to take the smaller of the two and do the opposite so I avoid a negative. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Gives me negative 9 equals 2x plus 21. Then I'm going to subtract 21 from both sides. I get negative 30 equals 2x. Divide by 2. And x equals negative 15. Done. All right, so you are on your own now for the evens, excuse my language there. Check in with a partner, make sure you're doing it correct. Raise your hand when you have each one done so I can check it before you move on.